Hello, Laverne. Thank you for your question. I am sorry that some of the emails coming from my math lab were not going to the correct email, and so it took me a while to really retrieve those emails, or actually know that some of you guys have sent me emails. Usually when you ask me a question, I will reply to you within 48 hours in a video explaining the question that you have. So 7.147 is an example of a function basically that you have to graph or find, and also find the domain and range for that function. So typically whenever you want to graph a function, you want to go ahead and find the f of x value for certain values of x. What that means is f of x is simply y on the graph, right? For any value of x, if we plug it into this function, you want to see what f of x equals to. So typically what I suggest that you do is look at an example. An example with my math lab really helps out a lot. Even if you don't want to look at an example, you want to try to figure it out on your own. This just what I said, as what I previously mentioned, is you just find what the f of x is for every value of x. So for instance, if I want to replace x with 1, the square root of 1 is 1, 1 minus 6 is minus 5, therefore f of x is minus 5, or y is minus 5. Then you have coordinates on the graph that you can plot, which means you'll have points on the graph that you can plot, and these points serve as your guidance. You'll have 1, 2, 3, at least you want to have 3 points for a curve, and then once you have those 3 points, you can connect them and you'll have a curve. Okay, so in this example they have a very similar function, the square root of x minus 9. So they went ahead and tried minus 1 at first. When they tried minus 1, well, if you want to plug a negative number under a square root, we do know that this is not a real number, and we cannot do that. Therefore, automatically you know that the x values cannot be negative. Okay, the x value cannot be negative, which means on these graphs you will not have a negative x. Any point on this side of the axis right here, this is the negative x. This is, the first hint that you'll get. Next, you want to know which values of x can I use? Well, obviously, if you can't use the negatives, you can use 0 and any number above it, any positive number. Therefore, we'll start with 0. If you start with x equals 0, you replace this x with 0, and then you calculate what f of x is equal to. So therefore 0 minus 9, f of x turns out to be minus 9. X equals to 1. When you replace x by 1, you'll have 1. The square root of 1 is 1. 1 minus 9 ends up being negative 8. Now you don't want to use 2, because then you're going to have decimals, and you're not going to have whole numbers. So what you want to do is just try to use something that when you put it under the square root, you can get rid of the square root and get a whole number. So therefore 4, the square root of 4 is 2. So 2 minus 9 is minus 7. Now you have 3 points, 3 coordinates. When you plot these 3 coordinates on the graph, you are going to have a curve, and this shows you what that curve is. Now, after you do that, you definitely want to determine the domain and the range. So, to determine the function's domain, remember that only the square root of non-negative numbers can be found. So all of your values for x have to be positives. Therefore, the domain of this function, just like this right here, the example that you have, or the actual homework question, x values have to be positive. Therefore, x has to be 0 and above. You could go up to positive infinity. So therefore, you're going to include your 0, because 0 can be placed under a radical. The square root of 0 is equal to 0, so therefore you're going to go from 0 all the way up to infinity, and this will be your domain for the function. And then what you're basically going to do is you are going to next, so when you're looking at the domain, you're looking at x values, and then when you are going to look at the range, you're going to look at the graph. So you first of all plotted this, you put the 3 coordinates, and then you connected them, and then you have a curve. So you're going to determine the possible y values. So what are the possible y values that you have? So for the domain, you're looking at x values, and we know that the x values are determined by the function itself, whatever value of x you can choose to put. In this case, we are limited by only 0 and any positive number. But when we look at the graph, what values of y are included? We see that we are down to -9, and all the way up. -9 is included, so this is why you can see a closed bracket, not an open one, all the way up to +infinity. Y can go to any other number. So this is basically how you are to solve this question. You're first to determine what values under the square root for x you can use. That helps you to determine the domain, and that also helps you to determine the 3 coordinates that you are going to use to graph your function. After that, you are going to determine the range, and that range is based on your actual graph and whatever it looks like. I hope this answers your question. If you have any more questions, please continue to send them my way, and I will get back to you as soon as I receive them. Again, I hope you enjoy this class, and know that I'm always here to support you. Thank you, Albert.